Larry Anderson, Life and Reason. This is going to be an introduction to the levels of depression. We're going to be talking about levels of depression in different ways. So I'm just going to sit here, take a deep breath, and outline the levels, outline the terminology and what we're talking about when we talk about levels of depression. First, let's get the chart up there. You'll see the chart up on the screen now, and it's called levels of depression. The vertical line is functionality and happiness. The horizontal line represents time, and the dotted line at the top represents something like a normal life. That's a goal. That's, you know, where we'd like to be around that, and where we normally are. And then you'll see there are two things: tipping points and trigger points. There's just one tipping point on here because a tipping point is a little bit, it's not less important, but we can, trigger points happen, they're the danger points. That's, you know, that's the skull and crossbone points. A tipping point we'll talk about here in just a second. Chart is directed, and these tapes about depression are directed to two sets of people. They're directed to the person that's depressed, and they are directed to the caretaker or the, you know, loving or family member of the person that's depressed. And their roles are quite different, and their concerns are quite different in addressing the problem of depression, especially severe depression. And this is the case whether or not, whatever the cause of the depression might be, whether it's chronic pain or some other cause. Okay, now a tipping point is the point where both the caretaker of the depressed person and the depressed person, it might not be the same for each one, but a tipping point is a point where we need to be able to spot and gauge changing levels of depression. So it is an emotional happening, an event in your life that you don't bounce back quickly. And we'll discuss a little bit about how to recognize that in the tapes coming up, and that's, you know, a fairly convoluted or long process. But for now, just remember that the tipping point for the depressed person is a point that you need to be aware of, that you need to familiarize yourself with when tipping points happen as you become more and more decreased, so that you're able to spot and gauge the depth of depression. That you need to understand that you've hit something and you're sliding. You're going down. You're sliding down that on the edge where you see where the tipping point is. You've hit that point, and you try. Maybe you've tried to stop, but your efforts aren't working, and you're sliding down. So what you will need to do, the first thing, and we've followed this, but this is very introductory. The first thing in that case, almost always, is if the depressed person and the caretaker think it's serious, see a doctor. Get on meds right away. I mean, that's the advice there. That's what you do. It's very important in our lives that when we get hit with an emotional punch, that we recognize that we have some sort of standard, so that we know how hard we're being punched, and so that we have some kind of scale, a rational scale, so that when we get into emotional territory that is deeper or frightening or new, something we haven't experienced before, that we have some rational way of measuring how hard we've been hit. And that's very important. For the caretaker, of course, you're an outside observer, so for the caretaker, it is being an objective observer and being able to being able to give your loved one the input that they've taken a hard hit, if they've taken a massive hit. Your job will be to be close enough to them to know to see when they take a hard hit and to be able to intervene. But it could be an easy fix, or it could turn into something that's literally a struggle for life. Now, a trigger point, I've chosen the word trigger and we put it in red ink there. We actually maybe should put a gun there. A trigger point is a danger point. It's when suicide ideation is in the forefront of the depressed person's mind. There's different levels of being focused on it. They may be consumed by it. They may the idea of death may just haunt them off and on, or they may be actually taking certain steps. And we'll visit what different problems each of those pose for the depressed person and for the caretaker. The person who is experiencing suicidal ideation may be calling for help, and at times they will drop little hints. The depressed person may actually be so fixed on the concept of committing suicide that no signals are sent out to the caregiver. So in the videos that follow, we will be looking at tipping points from the view of the depressed person and the caregiver. We will be looking at trigger points from the view of the depressed person and the caregiver. It's important that you try to understand and make that chart, levels of depression, rational. Understand what a trigger point is, what a tipping point is, what have been some tipping points in your life. And for the caretaker, I think the most important, at least from watching my wife, I think the most important thing for the caretaker, for this introductory point right now, is that you will be stepping into a quagmire that at many different angles to consider, many different levels of anger and hurt and and sadness in the depressed person, but also in the caretaker, because the caretaker is literally in a fight for a person's life, and the person isn't really sure that he wants to keep sustaining that life. So the depressed person, there's a lot of things that I talk about that a depressed person needs to own up to. And there are a lot of things that the caretaker needs to open themselves up to, because it is an immense task, immense undertaking.